I wonder if I notice your name appearing on everything. I mean, I don't want to. It strikes me if we kind of go back to all of those writings about sort of authorship of the 60s, particularly the Barthes' Death of the Author and Foucault's What is an Author. Foucault talks about what he calls the author function, and that you have to look at the different institutions and discourses of culture because the author function works differently. And there are some fields in which it doesn't press down so heavily, like television or graphic design, certainly for the public. But art has been, from the beginnings of modernism, has been forever troubled by the idea of what an author is, and has never, and probably can never, overcome it. There are pseudonyms, there are collective names, but the author function is supreme in art, in the way that it's not in other areas. And Foucault actually doesn't really talk about art, but he talks about the difference between writing and literature. Literature can't seem to operate without the author function, but other kinds of writing, perhaps journalism in newspapers or magazines, certainly for the public, they don't necessarily follow particular journalists or. So I wonder, with this interest in authorship, particularly where you went with the those kind of aggregate books that are being produced, how you feel about operating within the domain of art.
I don't know why I'm wearing that. I have to offer you two answers. The first one's short, the second one we might have to talk about. But I basically agree. But I see that paradox, that contradiction, as a constitutive paradox. Yeah, so it actually constitutes, which is why my name's everywhere. Yeah. So that's the short answer. It was really interesting to start the day with Barthes and then a young Susan Sontag, and I was immediately thinking, at that moment when French intellectual history was becoming so influential, the figure I would have liked to have just thrown out there and then would have been Foucault for precisely that essay, and particularly the revised second edition, because I think it does something different from the first. But the differentiation Foucault's trying to do there is between the kind of writing as information exchange that was so, despised by Maurice Blanchot and all of his, all those people he so admired, and what was forming then as écriture, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm sure he spells out the two or three qualities of écriture that separate it. Not least its attempt to get away from the author. So, but if you like, one of the only reasons that we can talk about contemporary art or contemporary writing or poetry or anything else, as if contemporary were a historical category and not just a con with in time, that there's always a contemporary, One of the reasons this contemporary moment is, is kind of a historical category is because it's post a lot of those questions, right? And that's where I think the paradox, that the hope in écriture and certain kinds of late modern or even high modern writing to get away from authorship through pseudonym, antonyms, anything, would seem, I'm not saying naive, but I can't imagine how you would do that now. So it's precisely being post that misassumption. That is part of the quality of it being contemporary. Now, the longer answer that I can't give you at all is the question about different registers, which is about between literature and art. But it's that fourth article on there, publishing as a practice of conceptual, does that systematically.
I'm rather overwhelmed by the intensity of the last session, but I thought it was so wonderful to encounter Luxus as a contrast to Permaphore, and actually have some colour and this fantastic woodcutty feel, which actually you didn't describe. And what I find interesting in terms of any relationship at all with your paper, makes me think of Barthes' word jouissance, because it seemed that Poland, with its different grim histories, suddenly found a moment where, amazingly enough, it was able to enjoy certain things, including being subversive, and including colour, and including both anarchic, I was going to say, and anachronistic things like woodcuts. And on the other hand, what's amazing about your tour de force is it does everything with the internet that I'm too scared and time poor to do in a way which is like obviously hyper intellectual on the one hand, but has its own very perverse, in my opinion, perhaps, form of really heavy intellectual jouissance. So I just want to kind of, in a hopeless way, bring these two incompatible papers together by just saying, I think that obviously conceptual art itself has got lots of jouissance in it, but I think particularly in your paper there was a kind of a grim determination to keep on with certain kinds of ostensibly non-enjoyable paradigms, and so it was such a great contrast and delightful contrast when Luxus changed the thing. So I'm just throwing that out to everybody else to kind of say that things seem incompatible, but there is this invested desire going on all the time. And these paradigms are changing, and amazingly enough, the end has brought us back to the beginning, which I think is rather wonderful too in terms of the shape of the afternoon.